My name is Harper Wilson, and I am 33 years old. Last Tuesday evening, I was sitting at a glass desk in a Chicago hotel room when a motion alert popped up on my phone. The notification was from the smart doorbell installed at my house in Austin, Texas. I tapped the screen expecting to see a delivery driver dropping off a package. Instead, the high-definition camera feed revealed my mother Diane standing on my cedar porch. Next to her was a man in a tailored navy suit holding a leather portfolio. Behind them stood a young couple holding hands and looking up at the custom ceiling with obvious admiration. I recognized the brass key my mother pulled from her purse. It was the spare I gave her 18 months ago with two specific instructions: water the indoor plants and collect the mail if my corporate audits kept me out of state for more than a week. My mother slid the key into the deadbolt. I could hear the audio feed crisp and clear. She pushed the heavy oak door open and smiled at the couple. She kept the place in great shape, my mother said, stepping into my foyer. But it is just too much space for a single woman who works all the time. We are ready to hand it over to a real family. The man in the suit smiled and made a note on his clipboard. His lapel badge read, Trent Harrison Broker. Before I tell you what I found when I opened my laptop, please take a moment to subscribe to Calm Senior Stories and drop your age and location in the comments. I would love to know where you are watching from. Let me take you back to how the dynamic in my family actually works. I am the reliable daughter, the senior financial auditor who built a life working 70-hour weeks. I bought my 4-bedroom house in Texas with money I saved by skipping vacations and driving a 10-year-old sedan. My older brother Liam is 36. He is the perpetual entrepreneur whose startups always fail. 3 years ago, I paid off his $12,000 credit card debt when collection agencies started calling my parents' house. Last year, I wrote a check to fix my parents' roof. Every time I asked for repayment, my father Richard would tell me that family comes first. I expected them to be ungrateful. I never expected them to steal my sanctuary. I did not scream at my phone. Panic is a useless currency. I sat in my quiet hotel room and scrubbed back through the video footage. I took 3 high-resolution screenshots of the real estate agent and his badge. Then I opened a new browser tab and searched for my home address. The real estate website loaded instantly. There was a photo of my house. The listing price was $650,000. Right below the price was a bright red banner that read pending sale. The description boasted motivated sellers ready for a quick closing. My parents had not just shown my house, they had already accepted an offer. I stared at the bright red banner on my laptop screen. The words pending sale seemed to burn themselves into my retinas. The asking price was $650,000. I scrolled down the webpage feeling a strange and cold detachment. It felt as though I were auditing the financial ruin of a stranger instead of looking at the liquidation of my own life. There were 32 high-resolution photographs of my property. I clicked through them one by one, tracing the extent of the invasion. The real estate agent had taken the liberty of staging my home for the market. They had pushed my favorite reading chair into a dark corner to make the room look larger. They had placed a generic vase of fake hydrangeas on my dining table. They even folded the towels in my guest bathroom into neat little hotel triangles. The property description was written with aggressive enthusiasm. It boasted about the custom cedar wrap-around porch and the mature oak trees providing shade in the backyard. The broker highlighted the modern kitchen appliances and the quiet neighborhood. But it was the final sentence of the description that caught my attention and held it. Motivated sellers looking for a quick close. Motivated sellers. I sat back in my hotel chair and let the phrase echo in my mind. I bought that house when I was 28 years old. I did not have a trust fund. I did not receive a sudden windfall of cash from a generous relative. I secured the down payment by working grueling 70-hour weeks for 5 straight years. I spent my 20s living out of heavy suitcases, traveling to audit regional corporate warehouses in the freezing winters of the Midwest. I ate cold takeout food in budget motels while my peers were traveling to Europe and going to weekend music festivals. I saved every single dollar because I wanted a sanctuary. I wanted a piece of Texas that belonged solely to me. I wanted walls that nobody could ever take away. And now my parents were offering those walls to a young couple they had charmed on a Tuesday afternoon. To understand the sheer audacity of this betrayal, you have to understand the rigid hierarchy of my family. I am the reliable workhorse. I am the daughter who is expected to function quietly and fund the safety net. My older brother Liam is the favorite investment. Liam is 36 years old, and he has never held a steady job for more than 14 months in his entire life. He identifies himself as a visionary entrepreneur. In reality, he is simply a man who chases expensive trends with other people's money. 5 years ago, his passion was a fitness application that never made it out of the early development phase. 3 years ago, it was a boutique coffee roasting business that ended with him defaulting on his commercial lease and leaving the equipment behind. Every time a venture collapsed, my parents were right there to cushion his fall and tell him he was just ahead of his time. But my parents are a retired public school teacher and a former mid-level retail manager. They do not have the infinite capital required to fund a perpetual visionary. That is where I came in. 3 years ago, the collection agencies started calling my parents' landline. Liam had listed them as references on his high-interest credit applications without asking. My mother called me in tears on a Sunday morning. She said Liam was deeply depressed, and the financial pressure was crushing his creative spirit. The outstanding balance was $12,000. I told her it was not my responsibility. She cried harder and told me that family steps up when things get dark. She weaponized my own success against me, pointing out my salary and my single status. I paid the debt in full directly to the creditor, so Liam would not see a dime of the cash. I demanded a strict payment plan from him. He laughed over the phone and told me I was acting like a greedy bank instead of a supportive sister. He never paid back a single cent of that $12,000. Last year, a severe spring hailstorm damaged the roof of my parents' house in Round Rock. Instead of filing an insurance claim and paying their standard deductible, my father called me. He claimed the insurance company was going to drop their policy if they filed a claim, and they could not afford the out-of-pocket contractor fees. I did not argue. I wrote a check for $15,000 to put a new roof over their heads. But I drew a hard line that day. I stood in their kitchen and told them it was the last time I would act as the family emergency fund. I told them Liam needed to get a real job, and they needed to stop enabling his fantasies. They apparently took my boundary as a personal challenge. I looked back at the real estate listing on my screen and checked the market history. The date the property was listed was 12 days ago. I had been sitting in this Chicago hotel on my business trip for exactly 14 days. The timeline crystallized in my mind with chilling clarity. The very moment my flight took off from Austin, my parents drove to my house. They let the real estate agent inside using the spare key they promised to use only for emergencies. They moved my personal items out of the camera frame. They allowed a professional photographer to walk through my private bedroom, my kitchen, and my home office. They listed my property on the open market, and within less than 2 weeks, they accepted a formal offer from a buyer. They had orchestrated all of this while sending me casual daily text messages, asking how the weather was in Illinois, and reminding me to stay warm. The deception was so thorough and so calculated that it left a cold knot in my stomach. A crucial question began to form in my analytical mind. How exactly did they list the property without my signature? Real estate transactions in Texas require extensive documentation. A broker cannot simply list a house because a nice older couple claims they have the authority to sell it. They needed a signed listing agreement. They needed proof of ownership. My parents were not on the deed. I bought the house under my own name before I transferred it. They must have found something in my home office and presented it to the agent. This meant they had not just invaded my home. They had dug through my private filing cabinets to build their illusion. My phone buzzed on the glass desk, breaking the silence of the room. I reached for it, expecting to see another motion alert from the front porch camera. The couple was probably leaving by now, dreaming about where they would put their sofa in my living room. It was not a camera alert. It was a new text message from Liam. I opened the message. There was a photo attached showing Liam sitting in a first-class airport lounge. He was wearing expensive designer sunglasses indoors and holding a glass of amber liquid up to the camera in a mock toast. The text printed below the photo dripped with his usual unearned confidence and blind entitlement. Heading out on a life-changing trip, little sister. Huge networking opportunity with some major tech investors on the Mediterranean. The family really came through for me this time to make it happen. Catch you when I am back, and maybe I will let you invest in the next big thing. I stared at his words. The family really came through for me this time. My parents had not sold my house because they were in a desperate financial crisis. They were not facing a medical emergency or a sudden foreclosure on their own home. They had liquidated the sanctuary I built with my own hands simply to buy their favorite son a luxury vacation. They were going to strip me of my greatest asset to pay for his yacht networking trip. I closed the text message. I did not reply to Liam. I did not tell him to enjoy the lounge. I opened my contacts list and found my father's number. It was time to find out exactly how deep this delusion went and how they justified stealing my home while I was trapped in another state. I pressed the green call icon next to my father's contact name and lifted the phone to my ear. The glass surface of the hotel desk felt freezing against my forearm. Outside, the Chicago skyline was vanishing behind a thick curtain of dark rain. I needed to approach this conversation the same way I approached a hostile corporate audit. Emotion is a liability during an investigation. Anger clouds judgment and gives the opposition a defensive advantage. My goal was not to secure an apology. My goal was to extract information and understand the exact parameters of the theft. The line rang 3 times before the call connected. "Harper, sweetie," my father said. His tone was buoyant and entirely unbothered. "How are things in the Windy City? Are you staying warm out there?" Before I could answer, a burst of electronic bells chimed through the receiver, followed by the recorded sound of a studio audience clapping enthusiastically. I recognized the audio immediately. It was a syndicated daytime game show. A host was encouraging a contestant to spin a brightly colored wheel. My father was sitting in his worn leather recliner in Round Rock watching daytime television. The sheer normalcy of that background noise sent a chilling wave through my chest. He was watching strangers' guest letters on a screen while actively orchestrating the liquidation of my real estate. "Why is there a pending sale banner across a public listing of my property?" I asked. I kept my voice flat and clinical. I did not raise my pitch. I did not sound frantic. The studio audience clapped again on the television. The line fell silent for 3 agonizing seconds. I could hear the distinct sound of him lowering the volume on his remote control. He did not stutter. He did not sound caught. When he finally spoke, he exhaled a heavy sigh of mild irritation, as if I were a child interrupting a very important adult conversation. "I told your mother we should have waited until after closing to tell you," he said. His voice carried a thick layer of condescension. "We wanted it to be a done deal, so you would not try to overcomplicate things the way you always do." Overcomplicate things. He was characterizing the unauthorized sale of a $650,000 home as a minor family logistics issue. "You gave a house tour to a young couple today," I said, gripping the edge of the glass desk. "You used the spare key I gave you for emergencies. You allowed a broker to stage my furniture. Explain the legal and financial justification for selling a property you do not own." Richard scoffed softly. It was the same dismissive sound he used when I was a teenager, asking why my college savings account had been drained to pay for Liam's failed landscaping business. "You need to look at the bigger picture, Harper," my father said, settling into his rehearsed rationalization. "Your brother finally has a real shot, a genuine once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He connected with a high-level tech syndicate out in California. They are chartering a luxury yacht in the Mediterranean for a month. It is an exclusive networking incubator for angel investors and startup founders. If Liam gets in that room, he is guaranteed to secure backing for his new software platform." I stared at the blurry city lights out my window. A networking incubator on a yacht. My 36-year-old brother was selling our parents a vacation disguised as a tech conference. "And how much does a ticket to this Mediterranean incubator cost?" I asked. $80,000, my father replied without a single ounce of hesitation. "It is a buy-in for the syndicate. You have to spend money to make money." He said the number with such casual confidence it made my vision blur. $80,000. That was more than the median annual household income in our state. It was an astronomical sum to hand to a man who had never successfully launched a single viable product. "You do not have $80,000, I stated. "You and Mom have a second mortgage on your house. You are living on fixed retirement pensions." "Exactly," my father said, his tone brightening, as if I had finally caught up to his brilliant logic. "That is why we had to look at our available family assets. We evaluated the situation objectively. You are a single woman, Harper. You work 70 hours a week. You spend half the year living out of corporate hotel suites. You have a 4-bedroom house sitting virtually empty in a premium real estate market. It is selfish to hoard that kind of space when it could be put to better use." I listened to him dismantle my life choices to justify his crime. I skipped vacations. I worked weekends. I sacrificed my personal life to build financial security. Now my own father was weaponizing my dedication against me. Because I worked hard, I apparently did not deserve to keep the rewards of my labor. "We accepted an excellent offer," my father continued, oblivious to my silence. "The buyers are a lovely young family. They love the wraparound porch. After the broker fees, we are taking a portion of the equity to clear our second mortgage. We are wiring the $80,000 to Liam for his syndicate buy-in. We will set aside a modest cut for you in a joint savings account. You will thank us later when Liam strikes it rich and pays us all back tenfold." The math echoed in my quiet hotel room. They were taking my sanctuary. They were paying off their own debts. They were funding a yacht charter for the golden child. And they were going to put whatever meager scraps remained into an account they controlled. "You broke into my home," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You are attempting to sell a house that legally belongs to me." My father sighed again, louder this time. "Stop being so dramatic, Harper. We went into your home office and found the property deed in your filing cabinet. We took it to a mobile notary from your mother's church group. She stamped the power of attorney transfer for us. It is all legitimate paperwork. We handled the administrative side so you would not have to stress about it during your audit trip." A mobile notary from a church group. They had actually found a woman willing to stamp a real estate transfer without my physical presence or valid identification. The depth of the conspiracy was staggering. They had actively committed fraud using their social circle to bypass state laws. "Cancel the listing," I said. "Call the broker right now and cancel the pending sale. If you do not stop this transaction, I will." "Your home paid for his happiness, Harper," my father said, his voice hardening into a cold, authoritative command. "This is happening. The closing date is set for next Friday. Do not cause a scene and embarrass this family. You will understand when you learn to put family first." The line went dead. He hung up. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the dark screen. The silence in the hotel room was heavy and suffocating. My father assumed I would simply absorb this loss. He assumed I would cry in my hotel room, accept my fate, and continue being the reliable, silent daughter who funded their delusions. He believed he held all the power because he had a stamped piece of paper from a church friend. He believed he had outsmarted me. I opened the encrypted application on my laptop desktop. I typed in a complex 16-character password and accessed my secure cloud storage drive. I did not feel the urge to cry. I felt a sharp, crystalline focus settling over my mind. My parents had broken into my home office safe. They had stolen the original paper warranty deed with my individual name printed on the front. They had forged a power of attorney and presented those outdated documents to a local real estate broker. But my parents are financially illiterate. They do not understand modern asset protection or the complexities of corporate real estate law. They did not know that 6 months ago, upon the strict advice of my wealth management firm, I had fundamentally altered my financial portfolio. I had hired an attorney and legally transferred the ownership of my Austin property out of my personal name. The document they forged was useless. The house they were trying to sell no longer belonged to Harper Wilson. The hotel room air conditioning hummed a steady low note. I sat in the ergonomic chair and rested my hands on the keyboard. Most people in my position would have thrown the phone against the wall. They would have booked the next flight out of O'Hare International Airport to confront their family standing on the front lawn. But fury is sloppy. Fury leaves loose ends. I process betrayal the same way I process a corrupted corporate ledger. I isolate the variables. I trace the timeline. I secure the documentation. I navigated through the encrypted directories on my hard drive. I opened a folder labeled Asset Protection and clicked on a watermarked digital document. The file loaded onto the screen displaying a crisp scan of heavy legal paper. In the upper right corner was a circular blue stamp from the Travis County Clerk's office. The document was a general warranty deed, but my personal name did not appear anywhere on the grantee line. 6 months ago, I had a long meeting with a wealth management advisor in downtown Austin. My salary had crossed a threshold that required sophisticated financial planning. My advisor warned me that owning premium real estate under a personal name exposes an individual to unnecessary liabilities and public scrutiny. He recommended restructuring my portfolio to shield my assets. I followed his advice. I hired a specialized firm to establish a legal entity known as the HW Capital Blind Trust. I zoomed in on the signature page of the digital PDF. The date was clearly printed next to my blue ink signature. October 12th, a brisk Tuesday afternoon. I remembered sitting in a high-backed leather chair smelling the rich mahogany of the boardroom table as I signed away my individual ownership. On that specific date, Harper Wilson ceased to own the four-bedroom house on the cedar-wrapped lot. The property became the exclusive legal possession of the trust. I became merely the beneficiary and the authorized trustee. My parents did not know about the trust. They view finance through a simplistic and outdated lens. To them, money is either cash in a checking account or a physical house you can walk inside. They do not comprehend corporate structures, shell entities, or fiduciary duties. I leaned back and mentally reconstructed their crime. The logistics of their theft required a specific sequence of events. When they entered my home using the spare key, they did not just wander around admiring the architecture. They walked down the hallway and entered my private office. They opened the bottom drawer of my oak filing cabinet. Hidden beneath a stack of old tax returns was a fireproof lockbox. I had used my brother's birthday as the combination code, hoping it would be easy to remember. My father must have spun the dial and guessed it. Inside that lockbox was an outdated paper deed. It was the original conveyance document from when I purchased the house 5 years ago. It had my personal name printed in bold black letters. It was legally obsolete, but it looked official. They took that obsolete paper. They drafted a fraudulent power of attorney granting themselves the right to sell the asset on my behalf. They needed a notary public to make the forgery appear legitimate to a real estate broker. My father had casually mentioned a woman from my mother's church group. I pictured Diane sitting in a local coffee shop sliding a document across the table to a trusting friend. The friend likely assumed my parents had my blessing. She pressed her official state seal onto the paper without verifying my physical presence or checking my identification. They handed that poisoned paperwork to Trent Harrison, the broker. He saw an official-looking deed, a notarized power of attorney, and a motivated older couple. He listed the property on the open market. The conflict had fundamentally shifted. A few minutes ago, this was a toxic family dispute about favoritism and greed. Now it was a matter of state and federal law. By forging a signature on a real estate conveyance, my parents had committed forgery of a financial instrument. By initiating a sale across state lines, utilizing digital banking networks to plan a wire transfer, they were wading into federal wire fraud. They had not just betrayed their daughter. They had attempted to defraud a legally protected corporate entity. The instinct to intervene surged in my chest. All I had to do was pick up the phone and call the brokerage firm. I could email the real estate agent a copy of the trust documents. The broker would instantly freeze the listing. The pending sale would be canceled. My house would be secure. But I kept my hands folded in my lap. I stared at the rain sliding down the Chicago window pane and ran a predictive model of my father's behavior. If I stopped the sale today, Richard Wilson would deploy his favorite defense mechanism. He would minimize the event. He would tell the rest of the family that I was overreacting. He would claim they were just testing the market to see what the house was worth and never actually intended to close the deal. My mother would cry and say it was a misunderstanding born out of a desperate desire to help Liam. They would twist the narrative until I looked like the cold, ungrateful daughter who refused to help her brother achieve his dreams. I remembered an incident from 8 years ago. Liam had borrowed my sedan without asking while I was asleep. He crashed it into a concrete retaining wall, causing $4,000 in damage. When I threatened to call the police to file a report, my parents staged an intervention. They begged me not to ruin his future over a simple borrowing mistake. They promised to pay for the repairs. They never did. I absorbed the cost. Liam faced zero consequences. They always escaped the consequences because I always intercepted the disaster before it became public record. I was not going to intercept the disaster this time. In the state of Texas, a real estate transaction requires a formal closing process. The buyers, the sellers, and an escrow officer must sit around a heavy conference table. The sellers are required to sign a thick stack of federally regulated documents under the penalty of perjury. They must sign a seller affidavit swearing they hold the exclusive and legal right to convey the title. They must sign wire transfer instructions directing hundreds of thousands of dollars into specific bank accounts. Once that blue ink dries on those final disclosures, the crime is permanently locked into the legal system. It ceases to be a family misunderstanding. It becomes undeniable, unspinnable documentary evidence of felony fraud. My father had confidently stated that closing day was next Friday. He believed he was 9 days away from cashing a check for $650,000 and sending his golden son to the Mediterranean. He felt safe because he thought I was ignorant. I decided to let them keep their illusion of safety. I would not call the broker. I would not call my mother. I would let them pack my belongings. I would let them dress up in their nice clothes. I would let them drive to the title company and sit down at that mahogany table. I would let them lift the pen and sign their own legal execution. But to execute a silent trap of this magnitude, I needed more than just a PDF on an encrypted hard drive. I needed a professional proxy who understood the exact mechanics of Texas property law. I needed someone who operated with the same cold clinical detachment that I did. I reached for my phone and opened my contact list, scrolling past my family members and corporate clients. I needed an attorney who specialized in real estate litigation and title disputes. I needed a predator in a tailored suit. I dialed the number for Sterling Real Estate Law at 8 o'clock Central Time the following morning. My coffee had grown cold on the glass desk, but I ignored it. A receptionist answered and attempted to route me to an intake paralegal. I politely declined. I stated that I was the sole beneficiary of a corporate trust currently being targeted by an active six-figure real estate fraud, and I required a partner on the line. 10 seconds later, Marcus Sterling picked up the receiver. He spoke with the clipped, hurried cadence of a man whose time was billed in 6-minute increments. He asked for my name and the nature of my emergency. I did not give him an emotional narrative. I did not mention my childhood or my brother's $12,000 credit card debt. I treated the conversation exactly like a quarterly logistics audit. I provided the physical address of the property. I provided the legal parcel identification number. I detailed the exact date I transferred the asset into the HW Capital Blind Trust. Then I explained that my biological parents had broken into my fireproof safe, stolen an outdated warranty deed, forged my signature on a power of attorney, and were currently under contract with an unsuspecting buyer. The line went quiet. I could hear the faint hum of traffic from his Austin office. Then Marcus let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. It was a brief, authentic sound of genuine disbelief from a veteran attorney who thought he had seen every variation of property theft. "Let me make sure I am grasping the full scope of this situation, Ms. Wilson," he said, his voice losing its initial rushed edge. "Your parents are currently attempting to convey a premium Travis County property they do not own using a falsified instrument, while the actual owner is sitting in a hotel room in Illinois." "That is an accurate summary," I replied. "The closing date is scheduled for next Friday." I heard the rapid clatter of a mechanical keyboard through the phone. Marcus was already accessing the Travis County Clerk digital database. He possessed direct portal access to unrecorded documents and preliminary title commitments. For 2 minutes, the only sound was his deliberate typing and the rhythmic tapping of his pen against his desk. "I have the preliminary file pulled up," Marcus finally said. The brokerage submitted a power of attorney to the title company yesterday to prepare for escrow. The signature purports to be yours. The document is stamped by a Texas notary public named Patricia Higgins. Does that name hold any significance to you? I closed my eyes and pictured the fellowship hall of my mother's church. Patricia Higgins was a retired administrative assistant who coordinated the annual holiday bake sale. She was a sweet, gullible woman who trusted my mother implicitly. Diane had likely walked into the church recreation room, handed Patricia the document, and spun a heartwarming tale about handling some tedious paperwork for her busy daughter. Patricia pressed her official state seal onto a fraudulent conveyance without demanding my physical presence or a valid driver's license. She is a member of my mother's congregation, I said. She did not witness my signature. I have been in Chicago for 2 weeks. I have the hotel receipts and corporate badges to prove my location. Marcus exhaled a slow breath. Your parents have fundamentally compromised this notary. Falsifying a jurat is a severe offense in this state. But the more pressing issue is how you want to proceed. We are standing at a strategic crossroads. He laid out the legal landscape with brutal clarity. He explained that we possessed enough evidence to halt the transaction today. He could draft a cease and desist order, append a copy of the trust documentation, and serve it to the brokerage firm before noon. The pending sale would shatter instantly. But we both knew how that scenario would play out. If we stopped them today, my father would launch a campaign of aggressive denial. Richard Wilson would stand in his living room and tell our entire extended family that I was being hysterical. He would claim they merely listed the house to appraise its market value and never intended to finalize the sale. My mother would shed performative tears, claiming they just wanted to secure a backup fund for Liam and that I was punishing them for trying to help my brother. They would retreat into their familiar roles of well-intentioned victims. The narrative would shift, and I would be painted as the villain. I do not want to cease and desist, I told Marcus. I want a definitive conclusion. Marcus paused, and I could hear the distinct shift in his tone. The hurried lawyer was gone, replaced by a tactical litigator who recognized a client willing to go the distance. If we do not stop the sale today, Marcus warned, they will proceed to the title company next Friday. They will sit across from the buyers and an escrow officer. They will be handed a stack of federally mandated closing disclosures. The moment they sign the seller affidavit, they are committing perjury. The moment they sign the settlement statement, authorizing the title company to wire the proceeds, they are triggering federal wire fraud statutes. The crime upgrades from a sloppy family theft to a prosecutable felony. He let the weight of those words settle in the quiet space between us. If we wait until closing day, Marcus continued, the trap snaps shut. There is no gaslighting your way out of a signed settlement statement. There is no claiming it was a simple misunderstanding when you instruct a financial institution to wire hundreds of thousands of dollars into your personal account. The paper trail becomes undeniable and permanent. But it requires you to maintain perfect operational security for the next 9 days. You cannot confront them. You cannot threaten them. You must allow them to believe they are succeeding. I looked at my suitcase sitting in the corner of the hotel room. 9 days of smiling through text messages. 9 days of allowing my mother to pack my personal belongings into cardboard boxes. 9 days of watching my father count money that did not belong to him. Prepare the documentation, Marcus. I said, my voice steady and resolute. We will meet them at the closing table. Marcus agreed to coordinate directly with the senior escrow officer at the title company next Thursday, the day before the closing. We would ambush them in the conference room. I paid his substantial retainer fee using a secure digital transfer from my corporate account. The investment was worth every single penny to ensure my parents could never spin this narrative again. I disconnected the call and set the phone down. The legal snare was set. The perimeter was secured. Now I just had to wait. Almost immediately, the screen illuminated again. It was another text message. I expected it to be a mundane update from my mother, perhaps asking if I wanted her to forward my mail to Chicago. Instead, the notification showed my brother's name. Liam was reaching out again. I opened the message. It was not a text. It was a link to a high-end travel profile accompanied by a brief note. The sheer entitlement radiating from his message was suffocating, and it forced me to confront the exact luxury my stolen sanctuary was funding. I opened the link my brother sent in his text message. It directed me straight to his public social media profile. Liam always treated his digital presence like a glossy magazine cover for a life he could never actually afford to live. His grid was a carefully curated sequence of rented sports cars, reserved seating at exclusive nightclubs, and borrowed luxury watches. Every image he uploaded was a calculated performance designed to project relentless success to an audience of strangers. To understand the profound depth of his delusion, you must understand his financial reality. When Liam launched his ill-fated boutique coffee business 3 years ago, he spent the first 2 months designing a sleek geometric logo and buying custom-branded espresso cups. He never secured a reliable bean supplier or signed a single wholesale distribution contract. He cares only about the aesthetic of wealth. He craves the applause of being an innovator, without possessing the discipline required to build anything tangible. And right now he was broadcasting his latest synthetic triumph. The newest post was a short high-definition video clip uploaded from a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. He was apparently treating himself to a lavish pre-networking vacation before his European yacht charter began. The camera panned across a private infinity pool, blending seamlessly into the turquoise waters of the Sea of Cortez. The sky was a flawless deep blue. Liam stepped into the frame wearing crisp white linen trousers and a pair of designer aviator sunglasses. He held a frosted green bottle of rare vintage champagne by the neck. The label was distinct and unmistakable. It was a $400 bottle of premium reserve bubbly. He popped the cork with an exaggerated flourish and sprayed the expensive liquid over the edge of the stone balcony, laughing straight into the camera lens. The caption beneath the video was a masterclass in parasitic entitlement. Big things coming, thanks to the best parents in the world for believing in the vision. He tagged both Richard and Diane in the text. He did not mention me. He did not mention that his upcoming visionary networking trip was being entirely funded by the fraudulent liquidation of his younger sister's primary residence. He genuinely believed he deserved this opulence. He viewed my house merely as a dormant resource meant to be harvested for his exclusive benefit. A sharp, analytical thought pierced through my silent observation. The closing date for my property was scheduled for next Friday. The title company escrow account remained empty. The broker had not wired a single dime to my parents yet. This meant Liam was currently funding his lavish Mexican resort stay on high-interest revolving credit. He was racking up thousands of dollars in premium room charges, top-shelf alcohol, and international first-class flights on the strict assumption that the $80,000 payout would clear his accounts in 9 days. He was floating a luxury lifestyle on a bridge loan of sheer arrogance, relying on a stolen check that would never arrive. I scrolled down to the comment section beneath the video. My mother was the very first person to reply. Her username sat right at the top, accompanied by 3 red heart emojis. You deserve the world, sweetie. We are so proud of you. Cannot wait to see you change the industry. I stared at those words until the letters began to blur on the glass screen of my phone. You deserve the world, sweetie. My mother was sitting in her modest living room in Round Rock, Texas, offering my brother the entire world while quietly stealing my home to pay the invoice. She validated his delusion in a public forum. She participated in a state-level felony to ensure her golden boy could drink vintage champagne on a Mexican balcony. The contrast between my grueling corporate audits and his unearned infinity pool stung with a visceral sharpness. I spent my 20s reviewing dense financial spreadsheets in budget motels located in freezing industrial parks just so I could afford a down payment on a house. I skipped social events and delayed gratification. He spent his 30s failing upward cushioned at every single turn by the stolen fruits of my labor. My parents praised his visionary status while treating my disciplined career as an endless ATM machine. I did not leave an angry comment under his video. I did not engage in a public digital screaming match or attempt to expose him to his followers. I treated his profile exactly like a volatile crime scene. I activated the screen recording function on my mobile device. I captured the video of the champagne, the geolocation tag, the self-congratulatory caption, and the exact timestamp of my mother's comment. I took static, high-resolution screenshots of the replies to ensure nothing was lost if he suddenly decided to delete the post out of panic later. I attached the multimedia files to a secure encrypted email and routed them directly to Marcus Sterling at his law firm. I added a brief subject line, noting this was evidence for pending civil litigation regarding financial damages and conspiracy. Marcus replied 3 minutes later with a brief clinical confirmation of receipt. He and I were compiling a comprehensive legal dossier. When the silent trap snapped shut at the closing table, the criminal charges for forgery and wire fraud would only be the beginning of their nightmare. The civil suit would target every single dollar they attempted to misappropriate. Liam's digital footprint would serve as undeniable proof of the financial conspiracy. He was actively documenting his own complicity in the theft, providing a chronological timeline of his fraudulent expenditures. He was building my legal case for me one social media post at a time. I closed the social media application and placed my phone back onto the glass desk. The digital mockery was documented, filed away, and secured. But the digital realm was merely a reflection of the physical violation currently happening back in Texas. My parents were not just selling a theoretical paper asset. They were standing inside the walls of my physical sanctuary. If the closing was scheduled for next Friday, the property had to be delivered vacant and broom cleaned to the buyers. That is standard operating procedure for any residential real estate transaction. My parents could not simply forge a warranty deed and wait to collect a six-figure check. They had to empty a 4-bedroom house. They had to erase every physical trace of Harper Wilson from the premises before the buyers conducted their final walkthrough. Right on cue, my phone vibrated against the desk. A new text message appeared on the screen. It was from my mother. The tone was sickeningly sweet, a thin veneer of maternal care masking a profound logistical intrusion. "Just checking in, honey. Your father and I know how busy you are with your big corporate audit in Chicago. We decided to do some early spring cleaning at your place to help you out. We are boxing up some clutter, so you do not have to worry about it when you get back. Love you." Boxing up some clutter. That was her sanitized, delicate description for packing up my entire existence. She was actively directing movers through my hallways. She was throwing my framed college degrees, my private financial records, my vintage record collection, and the antique lamp from my grandmother into cheap cardboard boxes. They were dismantling my life piece by piece to clear the stage for the new owners. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They were violating my physical space while smiling through a text message pretending to do me a favor. I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to push this desecration. My corporate audit in Chicago was concluding on Wednesday. I needed to return to Austin early. I needed to witness the destruction of my sanctuary with my own eyes. But I could not go home. I had to become a ghost in my own city, operating entirely in the shadows to maintain the integrity of the closing day trap. My corporate audit in Chicago concluded on Wednesday afternoon. I signed the final compliance reports, handed my security badge to the regional manager, and took a taxi directly to the airport. During the 2-hour flight back to Austin, Texas, I sat by the window and watched the thick clouds drift over the Midwest. The cabin was quiet, and my mind mirrored that stillness. I was flying back to a city where I legally possessed a premium piece of real estate, but I could not go home. If I walked through my own front door, my parents would realize their scheme was compromised. The trap required my continued geographic absence. When the plane landed at the Austin Bergstrom terminal, I bypassed the standard rideshare pickup zone outside the baggage claim. I walked directly to the commercial rental counter and leased a generic silver sedan. It was the kind of vehicle that blends into any suburban street without drawing a single second glance from a passing neighbor. I drove away from the airport and navigated toward Interstate 35. I bypassed my own neighborhood entirely and booked a standard room at a Marriott hotel located exactly 2 miles away from my actual house. I carried my suitcase into the sterile room, placed it on the luggage rack, and looked at the generic landscape painting on the wall. I was officially a ghost haunting my own life. The next morning, the Texas heat was already radiating off the asphalt. I woke up early, drank a cup of dark hotel coffee, and drove the silver sedan into my subdivision. I did not turn onto my specific cul-de-sac. I parked one street over under the heavy canopy of a mature live oak tree. From this elevated vantage point, I had a clear, unobstructed line of sight to my front yard. I left the engine idling and turned the air conditioning vents toward my face to combat the rising temperature. A battered white box truck was backed into my driveway. The side panels bore no corporate logo, indicating my parents had hired cheap hourly labor to clear the property. They were cutting corners to maximize the profit they intended to steal from the impending sale. I watched through the tinted windshield as two men carried heavy cardboard boxes out of my front door. Then my mother walked onto the porch. Diane wore comfortable walking shoes and a wide-brimmed sun hat. She held a plastic clipboard in her left hand, pointing and giving verbal instructions to the laborers. The domestic tranquility of her posture was chilling. She looked like a helpful neighbor volunteering for a community charity drive. She did not look like a woman orchestrating a federal wire fraud scheme while simultaneously displacing her youngest child. I watched one of the hired men carry a familiar stack of framed items out the door. My vision locked onto the dark mahogany wood catching the morning sunlight. It was my Master of Science diploma from the university. Next to it was the vintage brass mantel clock I had inherited from my late grandmother. The man stacked them haphazardly onto the metal floor of the truck next to a pile of garden hoses. My mother barely glanced at the items. She checked a box on her clipboard and waved the man back inside to fetch another load of my personal history. The steering wheel leather dug deeply into my palms. The instinct to intervene burned in my chest with an intense physical heat. All I had to do was open the car door, walk up the driveway, and demand the laborers drop my possessions. I could threaten to call the local police and report a burglary in progress right there on the lawn. But that action would shatter the delicate legal snare Marcus and I had spent days constructing. Reclaiming a brass clock today meant sacrificing the felony prosecution tomorrow. I forced myself to loosen my grip on the steering wheel. I leaned back into the synthetic fabric of the rental car seat and slowed my breathing. Restraint is the most difficult discipline a person can master. It requires you to watch your own boundaries being violated in real time while maintaining a rigid focus on the long-term objective. I watched my mother systematically erase my existence from the property. She was stripping the interior walls bare. She was removing every physical trace of the daughter who funded her lifestyle to prepare a pristine stage for the buyer's closing walkthrough. For 3 hours, I sat in the idling sedan. I watched them load my custom oak dining chairs, my winter coats, and my professional filing cabinets into the back of the rented truck. My parents were treating my accumulated life like worthless debris standing between them and a six-figure payout. They were cleaning the slate so my brother could drink vintage champagne on a chartered yacht in the Mediterranean. Every item placed in that truck represented another count of civil conversion of property to add to the impending lawsuit. Shortly after noon, the truck tailgate slammed shut with a loud metallic crash. My mother handed the driver a thin stack of cash from her purse. The truck rumbled to life and pulled out of my driveway, leaving dark tire marks on the concrete. Just as the vehicle turned the corner, my cell phone vibrated in the center console cup holder. The screen displayed a new message from my father. I picked up the phone and read the text. The words were brief and dripped with an unearned, condescending authority. "We moved your stuff to a storage unit on Burnett Road. Escrow closes Friday. Do not cause a scene, Harper." I analyzed the syntax of his message like a forensic accountant reviewing a forged receipt. He did not ask for my permission to relocate my belongings. He did not offer an apology for the invasion of privacy or the disruption to my life. He presented the theft as a finalized logistical fact. He truly believed the battle was already over. He thought the geographical distance and my demanding corporate schedule had rendered me powerless to stop the transaction. The final sentence was a direct command expecting unconditional submission. Do not cause a scene. I was preemptively silencing the victim to protect his own comfort and ensure his illicit payday went off without a hitch. He wanted the transition of my wealth to his favorite son to be quiet and compliant. I tapped the reply field on the screen. I did not draft a long emotional paragraph detailing the depth of my pain. I did not threaten him with the impending civil lawsuit or reveal the existence of the unrecorded corporate trust documents. I kept my response factual, precise, and devoid of any readable emotion. I typed 6 words. I will see you on Friday. I pressed send and watched the message bubble turn green on the digital display. My father would read those 6 words and interpret them as a white flag of surrender. He would assume I was agreeing to attend the closing simply to accept whatever meager financial scraps he decided to leave in the joint savings account. He would view my response as the ultimate capitulation of a defeated daughter who finally learned to put family first. But those 6 words were not a surrender. They were a sworn promise of destruction. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving my empty house behind. The physical property was no longer the primary battleground. The real war was going to be fought on paper. It was time to call Marcus Sterling and coordinate the final logistical details with the title company. The snare was fully loaded, and the escrow officer was waiting for her instructions. I arrived at the law offices of Marcus Sterling at 9 o'clock on Thursday morning. The day before closing day required precise logistical coordination. Marcus operated out of a corner suite on the 15th floor of a glass building downtown. His workspace was devoid of personal photographs or warm decorations. The walls were lined with bound legal volumes and thick case files. Sitting right in the center of his pristine mahogany desk was a heavy self-inking stamp with a bright red handle. The rubber lettering on the bottom read "Void" in thick block capitals. It was a physical manifestation of exactly what we were about to do to my parents' fabricated transaction. I sat in a structured leather chair across from Marcus. He tapped the spacebar on his keyboard to wake up his computer monitors. Today we had to bring the title company into our confidence. In the state of Texas, residential real estate transactions require a neutral third party to handle the escrow funds and issue a title insurance policy. This neutral party ensures the seller actually possesses the legal right to convey the property. The senior escrow officer assigned to my house was a woman named Sarah. She had built a pristine reputation over 2 decades in the Austin market. Sarah was known for her meticulous attention to detail and her zero-tolerance policy for financial irregularities. Marcus dialed her direct office extension and placed the call on the central speakerphone. Sarah answered on the second ring. Her tone was brisk and professional, expecting a routine inquiry about the final closing disclosures for the Friday appointment. "Good morning, Marcus," she said. "I have the settlement statements for your client's property ready for review. The buyers have already wired their earnest money into our escrow account. We are fully prepared for the sellers to sign tomorrow at 10 o'clock. "Good morning, Sarah," Marcus replied. His voice was calm, but carried a distinct edge of authority. "I need you to pause all preparations for that specific file. I am sitting here with my client, Harper Wilson. She is the true and exclusive owner of the parcel. The individuals scheduled to sit at your conference table tomorrow are her biological parents. They are currently attempting to perpetrate a felony fraud against your agency." The speakerphone broadcast a long, heavy silence. In the real estate industry, those words are the equivalent of pulling a fire alarm. Title officers carry personal liability for the transactions they approve. If Sarah closed a fraudulent deal, her agency would be forced to pay a 6-figure insurance claim to the buyers, and she could permanently lose her professional license. Marcus did not give her time to panic. He clicked his mouse and sent a secure encrypted file directly to her professional email inbox. "I am transmitting the certified establishment documents for the HW Capital Blind Trust," Marcus stated. Harper Wilson transferred the sole ownership of this property into the trust 6 months ago. We recorded the conveyance with the county. The sellers submitted an outdated paper deed and a falsified power of attorney stamped by a fraudulent mobile notary. They broke into my client's personal safe to procure the obsolete paperwork. They possess zero legal authority to execute this sale. I heard the rapid clicking of Sarah opening the email attachments. She was a veteran officer reading the legal jargon with practiced speed. The silence stretched again as she cross-referenced the dates on my authentic trust documents with the forged power of attorney my parents had submitted to her office. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with a mixture of profound shock and rising anger. "They submitted these documents to my desk on Monday," she said. "The broker assured me the sellers were highly motivated and acting on behalf of their busy daughter. The notary stamp looked standard. I was about to authorize the transfer of $650,000 based on a forged jurat. I was almost a pawn in a federal wire fraud scheme." "You are not a pawn, Sarah," I said, leaning closer to the speakerphone microphone. "You are the person who is going to help us lock the trap." Sarah exhaled a sharp breath. "State regulations require me to immediately halt the transaction and notify the underwriting department," she explained. "I have to flag the file and cancel the Friday appointment. We must refund the buyer's earnest money today." Marcus held up a hand, even though she could not see him. "If you cancel the appointment today, the perpetrators will simply vanish into the shadows," he warned. "They will claim it was a familial misunderstanding. They will avoid prosecution, and they will try this again. We need them to commit to the crime on paper. We need to maximize their legal liability." Marcus leaned forward and outlined the exact procedural mechanics of our plan. He detailed the specific requirements of a Texas closing. To finalize a property sale, the sellers must sit in a room and physically sign a mountain of federally regulated paperwork. The most critical document is the seller affidavit of title. By signing that specific page, the individual swears under penalty of perjury that they hold the exclusive right to convey the asset. The second critical document is the wire transfer authorization. By signing that form, the individual instructs a financial institution to route hundreds of thousands of dollars into a designated personal account. "We need them to sign those disclosures," Marcus instructed. "We need the blue ink to dry on the paper. The moment they execute those two signatures, their plausible deniability evaporates. The crime upgrades from an attempted theft to a fully prosecutable federal offense." Sarah understood the strategy immediately. Her initial panic transformed into cold professional determination. She felt personally violated by my parents' deception. They had tried to exploit her agency and jeopardize her livelihood to fund a vacation. "I will proceed with the schedule exactly as planned," Sarah confirmed. "The buyers are scheduled to arrive at 9:45. The sellers, your parents, are scheduled for 10. I will place the standard closing disclosures on the mahogany table. I will ask them to verify their identities and sign the affidavit of title under oath. And then I will walk through the door," I added. Marcus smiled a sharp, predatory expression. "I will accompany my client," he said. "We will wait in the adjacent administrative office behind the frosted glass partition. The moment Richard and Diane Wilson commit perjury on your documents, you will challenge their chain of title. That is our cue to enter the conference room." We spent the next hour reviewing the meticulous details. We discussed the seating arrangements in the title company conference room. We verified the security protocols for the building. We established a subtle verbal signal Sarah would use to indicate the forged documents were fully executed. Every single variable was calculated and controlled. This procedural precision was necessary because the stakes involved innocent bystanders. The young couple purchasing the home had no idea they were walking into a legal war zone. They had likely spent months saving their money dreaming about raising a family on my cedar porch. My parents were willing to destroy those young buyers' financial futures without a second thought. Letting the trap snap shut tomorrow would protect the buyers' earnest money and ensure my parents faced the severe consequences of their greed. The speakerphone call ended with a mutual agreement. Sarah promised to have the paperwork ready. Marcus promised to bring the authentic corporate trust portfolio. I promised to remain entirely invisible until the exact right second. I left the law office and drove the rented silver sedan back to my sterile hotel room. The afternoon sun baked the Texas pavement, but I felt entirely cold. I ordered a plain sandwich from room service and ate it while staring at the blank television screen. I thought about the text message my father had sent me the previous day. He had ordered me not to cause a scene. He expected a quiet, submissive daughter to accept her financial ruin in silence. I placed my empty plate on the nightstand and set an alarm on my phone for 7 o'clock the next morning. The final preparation was complete. The evidence was secured. The professionals were aligned. The snare was perfectly calibrated and waiting for the prey. Tomorrow, my parents would put on their best church clothes and drive to a downtown office building expecting to collect a fortune. They had no idea they were walking directly into a vault that would lock from the outside. Friday morning arrived with a bright, blinding Texas sun. I drove the rented silver sedan into the heart of downtown Austin and parked in the subterranean garage of the title agency building. I took the elevator to the fourth floor, arriving a full hour before the scheduled 10 o'clock closing appointment. Marcus Sterling was already waiting for me in the lobby. He wore a tailored dark charcoal suit and carried a thick leather briefcase containing the certified trust portfolio. We did not exchange pleasantries. We moved with the silent, synchronized efficiency of an audit team stepping into a hostile corporate environment. Sarah, the senior escrow officer, met us at the reception desk. Her expression was tight and focused. She escorted Marcus and me into a small administrative office located directly adjacent to the primary conference room. The two spaces were separated only by a wall of thick frosted glass. I could see distorted shapes and blurry silhouettes through the pane, but the audio transmission was flawless. The acoustics of the modern corporate architecture failed to account for the half-inch gap beneath the connecting door. Marcus sat in a rolling chair and placed his briefcase on his lap. I stood perfectly still near the glass partition. My hands were steady. My heart maintained a calm resting rhythm. At 9:45, the front door of the suite chimed. I watched the blurred silhouettes of two people enter the main conference room. It was the buyers. Through the gap beneath the door, I heard their nervous, excited chatter as they took their seats. The husband mentioned how many grueling overtime shifts it took them to save the earnest money. The wife talked about her plans to paint the nursery a soft yellow and how she could already picture their future children playing on the custom cedar porch. They were innocent bystanders walking into a financial slaughterhouse. My parents were entirely willing to take this earnest young couple's life savings and hand them a worthless forged deed in exchange. If I had halted the transaction earlier this week, these buyers would have been entangled in a messy title dispute trying to recover their escrow funds. By allowing the trap to snap shut at the closing table, I was ensuring the funds remained secure, and my parents absorbed the entirety of the legal fallout. The sheer callousness of my parents willing to destroy a young family's financial future reinforced my rigid resolve. I felt no guilt for what was about to happen. At precisely 10 o'clock, the heavy outer door swung open again. The distinct, confident cadence of my father's leather loafers echoed against the hardwood floor. My mother followed close behind him, her low heels clicking in rhythm. I watched their distorted shapes settle into the high-backed chairs on the opposite side of the mahogany table. My father cleared his throat and introduced himself to the young couple. His voice was robust and overflowing with unearned authority. He projected the aura of a wealthy patriarch conducting a routine portfolio liquidation. I looked through the frosted pane and noticed a distinct glint of metallic light catching the overhead fixtures. Richard raised his left wrist to adjust his tailored cuff. A heavy stainless steel chronograph watch gleamed under the lights. I recognized the premium luxury brand instantly. The retail price exceeded $3,000. My father did not possess $3,000 in disposable income. He had clearly financed the timepiece on a high-interest credit line, operating on the firm assumption that a six-figure wire transfer would hit his checking account by noon. He was literally wearing the proceeds of a felony fraud before the ink was even dry on the settlement papers. The rhythmic tapping of the metal watchband against the mahogany table echoed through the frosted glass. It was the sound of profound premature arrogance. The young husband politely thanked my parents for accepting their offer so quickly. He mentioned how much they loved the quiet neighborhood and the mature oak trees in the backyard. My father absorbed the compliment as if he had built the house with his own bare hands instead of stealing it from his daughter. He leaned back in his leather chair and steered the conversation directly toward his favorite subject. "We are thrilled to pass the property on to a young family," my father said. "We needed to liquidate the asset quickly to support our son's latest business venture. He is a visionary in the tech industry. He is currently chartering a yacht in the Mediterranean for an exclusive networking incubator with high-level angel investors. You know how it is in the startup world. You have to strike while the iron is hot." I listened to him spin his delusion to strangers. He spoke about Liam with a profound, glowing reverence. He omitted the part where he broke into a safe to forge a legal instrument to fund that yacht charter. The young wife smiled politely and asked if it was difficult to pack up such a large house so fast. My mother let out a light, breezy laugh. It was the exact same laugh she used at church bake sales when someone complimented her recipes. "Oh, it was a whirlwind," Diane said. "But we are very efficient. We managed to clean the entire place out and box up the clutter in just a few days. We wanted to make sure the space was pristine for you." We left the keys on the kitchen counter and moved the remaining boxes to a storage unit. She characterized the systematic erasure of my life as an act of neighborly goodwill. She called my framed diplomas, my financial records, and my grandmother's antique clock clutter. I stood in the adjacent room and focused on the steady intake and exhale of my own breath. I was listening to the people who raised me casually recount the destruction of my sanctuary. They felt zero remorse. They felt zero anxiety. They were basking in the glow of their perceived cleverness. My parents have always operated under a delusion of impending wealth. When I was in high school, my father took out a predatory loan against a paid-off family sedan to cover one of Liam's failed investment schemes. The vehicle was repossessed 3 months later. My father blamed the lending institution. My mother blamed the economy. Neither of them held Liam accountable for losing the cash. They possess an endless capacity to rewrite reality to avoid accountability. Today, they were rewriting reality to justify a state-level financial crime. They viewed my house not as a home, but as a dormant resource waiting to be harvested for their favorite son. But the legal system does not care about family narratives. The legal system only cares about what can be proven on paper. The brass handle of the main conference room door clicked and turned. Sarah, the senior escrow officer, walked into the room carrying a thick manila folder. Her posture was a masterclass in detached professionalism. I did not detect a single tremor in her step. She did not look toward the frosted glass window where Marcus and I were hiding. She focused entirely on the individuals seated in front of her. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah said, taking her seat at the head of the mahogany table. "I have the final settlement statements and the warranty deed ready for execution. We will process the buyer's funds first, and then we will finalize the seller disclosures." She opened the manila folder and arranged her pens in a neat row. The crisp sound of paper sliding across wood filled the quiet room. "Before we begin signing these binding legal instruments, I need to verify the identities of all parties present," Sarah continued. She turned her attention directly to Richard and Diane. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, please place your current government-issued identification cards face up on the table. We need them for the notary record." My father reached into his tailored slacks and pulled out his leather wallet. My mother unclasped her designer purse. They were willingly handing over their official state IDs to an escrow officer. They were cementing their identities to a transaction they had zero legal right to conduct. The snare was tightening around their ankles and they were happily tying the knot themselves. Through the frosted glass partition, I watched Sarah orchestrate the transaction with the clinical precision of a surgeon. She did not start with my parents. She wisely began the appointment by addressing the young buyers. This was a tactical maneuver designed to lull my father into a false sense of security. By watching the buyers execute their legitimate mortgage documents and finalize their down payment, my parents would taste the impending victory. The illusion of success would override any lingering caution they might possess. Sarah placed a thick stack of loan disclosures in front of the young couple. For 20 minutes, the only sounds in the main conference room were the rustling of heavy paper and the soft thud of a notary stamp. The young husband asked a few standard questions about property taxes and escrow shortages. Sarah answered each inquiry with professional grace. The buyers signed their deed of trust, pledging their future earnings to secure this home. They were binding themselves to 30 years of financial obligation. I observed my father during this process. Richard leaned back in his high leather chair and steepled his fingers beneath his chin. A distinct predatory gleam surfaced in his eyes. He watched the buyers sign their names with the greedy impatience of a man waiting for a slot machine to dispense a jackpot. He did not care that these young people were draining their savings accounts. He did not care that he was selling them a fraudulent title that would inevitably trigger a catastrophic leak for their new family. His empathy extended only to the borders of his own self-interest and the lavish lifestyle of his favorite son. When the buyers completed their final signature, Sarah gathered their paperwork and tapped the edges against the mahogany table to align the pages. She moved the stack to the far corner of her desk. The first phase was complete. The earnest money and the bank funds were officially secured in the title agency escrow account. Now we move to the seller disclosures, Sarah announced. Her voice shifted, dropping the warm customer service tone and adopting a crisp, authoritative cadence. She reached into her manila folder and extracted a separate stack of documents printed on legal-sized paper. My father adjusted his posture, sitting up straight and pulling his chair closer to the table. He reached into his suit jacket and produced a heavy metallic pen. My mother mirrored his movements, folding her hands on the table and offering a polite, eager smile. They were ready to claim their unearned fortune. Sarah placed the primary closing disclosure in front of them. This document is colloquially known as the settlement statement. It outlines every single financial variable of the real estate transaction. It lists the gross sale price, the broker commissions, the prorated property taxes, and the precise dollar amount of the net proceeds. Please review page 3, Sarah instructed, pointing a manicured finger at a bold number at the bottom of the column. This figure represents your final cash to close. It is the exact amount that will be disbursed to you once the transaction funds. I could not see the specific numbers from my vantage point behind the glass, but I knew the math. After the standard deductions, the net payout hovered near $600,000. My father stared at that number for a long, quiet moment. His chest swelled. He was likely calculating the $80,000 wire transfer for Liam's Mediterranean yacht networking trip and the payoff amount for his own secondary mortgage. He saw financial salvation printed in black ink. He nodded his head and slashed his signature across the bottom of the page. Diane leaned over and signed her name right next to his. They had just executed a federal closing disclosure under false pretenses, but the trap required a more explicit violation. We needed them to swear an oath on a formal legal instrument. Sarah pulled away the settlement statement and replaced it with a single sheet of premium watermark paper. This was the seller affidavit of title. In the state of Texas, this specific document carries immense legal weight. It is an explicit sworn declaration protecting the title insurance company from concealed liabilities. By signing it, the seller legally guarantees they are the sole undisputed owners of the parcel and possess the exclusive right to convey the deed. I need both of you to read this page carefully, Sarah said. Her tone was perfectly even, stripped of any conversational warmth. This is a sworn affidavit. I need you to swear under penalty of perjury that you hold the exclusive and legal right to convey this property, and that no other entity possesses an unrecorded claim to the title. The young buyers sat quietly observing the formal procedure. My father barely glanced at the dense paragraphs of legal text. He viewed rules and regulations as mere suggestions designed for lesser people. Throughout the late 90s, he habitually wrote bad checks to local hardware stores, assuming his natural charm would convince the bank managers to waive the overdraft fees. He operated on the strict belief that confidence could overwrite reality. He carried that same arrogant assumption into this corporate conference room. Richard scoffed, waving his hand in a dismissive arc. Of course we hold the right to sell it, he said. It is our daughter's house. She gave us the authority to handle the logistics because she travels so much for her corporate job. Everything is in order. He gripped his metallic pen. The title company mandates the use of blue ink for all original signatures to prevent fraudulent photocopying. Through the gap beneath the frosted glass door, I heard the distinct harsh scratch of the blue ink pen carving his name into the heavy paper. That brief scratching sound marked the exact point of no return. He slid the document toward my mother. Diane did not hesitate. She smiled at the young buyers and applied her own signature right below his. I stood in the adjacent room and documented the specific crimes clicking into place. By submitting the forged power of attorney to initiate the sale, they committed state-level forgery. By swearing a false oath on the affidavit of title, they committed perjury. Sarah did not blink. She retrieved the final crucial document from her folder. It was a single-page form bearing the logo of a national banking institution. "These are the wire transfer instructions," Sarah explained. "Please write the routing number and the specific account number where you wish to receive the net proceeds. Verify the digits carefully. Once the funds are released, the transfer cannot be reversed." My father leaned over the paper. He wrote the numbers with meticulous care, verifying his work twice. He was instructing a federally insured financial institution to transmit stolen funds into his personal checking account across state lines. The moment he handed that paper back to the escrow officer, the federal wire fraud statute was fully activated. Sarah collected the wire transfer form. She gathered the closing disclosure and the signed affidavit of title. She placed the documents into her manila folder and closed the cover. She smoothed her hands over the smooth cardboard, aligning the edges with deliberate care. She had secured the physical evidence. The transaction was locked. The snare was closed. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Sarah leaned back in her chair and folded her hands on top of the closed folder. The polite escrow officer vanished. She leveled a cold, unblinking stare directly at my father. "There seems to be a minor discrepancy with the title chain," Sarah said. Her voice carried a sharp, authoritative echo that bounced off the glass walls. The young husband shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing the sudden drop in the room temperature. My mother's eager smile faltered slightly. My father frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together in confusion. "A discrepancy," he repeated. "What kind of discrepancy?" "We submitted the power of attorney earlier this week. The broker assured us the file was clear." "The power of attorney you submitted is attached to an obsolete warranty deed," Sarah stated, holding his gaze. "The document you provided lists Harper Wilson as the individual owner. However, the Travis County Clerk records indicate that this property is exclusively owned by a corporate entity known as the HW Capital Blind Trust." My father opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. The arrogant facade cracked, revealing a sudden spike of genuine panic beneath the surface. He did not understand the legal terminology, but he recognized the tone of a professional denying him his money. "In order to clear this specific discrepancy and authorize the release of any funds," Sarah continued, "I need to bring in the actual authorized trustee of the property to verify the release." Richard planted his hands on the mahogany table. His face flushed a deep shade of crimson. "What do you mean?" he demanded, his voice rising in volume. "I just told you we have the authority. My daughter is in Chicago." I reached out and grasped the brass handle of the connecting door. I turned the metal lever and pushed the heavy door open. I pushed the heavy frosted glass door open and stepped into the main conference room. Marcus Sterling followed close behind me, carrying his thick leather briefcase. The ambient noise in the room vanished instantly. It felt as though someone had pulled the plug on a loud machine. My mother sat near the center of the mahogany table. She had accepted a courtesy beverage from the receptionist earlier that morning. She held a white ceramic cup filled with dark roast coffee. When she saw my face, the color drained from her cheeks with astonishing speed, leaving her skin a pale ashen gray. Her fingers lost their grip. The ceramic cup slipped from her hands and struck the edge of the wooden table before tumbling to the floor. The vessel shattered. Hot brown liquid splashed across her beige leather shoes and soaked into the expensive woven carpet. Diane did not attempt to clean the mess. She merely stared at me while the dark stain expanded near her feet. My father reacted differently. Richard Wilson operates on a strict diet of control and intimidation. When a variable disrupts his carefully organized reality, his immediate instinct is to assert dominance. He pushed his heavy chair back and stood up. His tall frame loomed over the conference table. He adjusted his suit jacket, attempting to project the illusion of unquestioned authority. "Harper, what are you doing here?" my father demanded. His voice was loud, aiming to fill the quiet space with his own narrative. "You are supposed to be in Chicago working on your audit. This is an adult business meeting. Go wait in the lobby until we finish signing these papers." He delivered the command as if I were a misbehaving teenager interrupting a dinner party. He truly believed he could order me out of the room and simply resume stealing my six-figure asset. He thought his patriarchal tone could override a federal fraud investigation. I did not reply to his demand. I did not take a single step backward. I walked to the edge of the table and stood beside the young buyers. Marcus positioned himself next to me, unlatching the brass clasps on his briefcase. The click of the metal lock sounded like a gun hammer pulling back in the silent room. Sarah, the senior escrow officer, did not look at my father. She ignored his loud command entirely. She opened her manila folder and extracted the forged power of attorney my parents had submitted on Monday. She placed it flat on the table next to the signed closing disclosures. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilson," Sarah said. Her tone possessed the cold density of glacial ice. "You just swore under penalty of perjury that you hold the legal authority to execute this transaction." My father glared at the escrow officer. "We do hold the authority," he insisted, though his voice carried a faint tremor of uncertainty. "She is our daughter. We are acting on her behalf. Harper, tell this woman to process the wire transfer." Sarah did not wait for my response. She turned her attention to Marcus. Marcus withdrew a thick stack of certified documents from his briefcase. The pages featured raised state seals and authentic blue ink signatures. He handed the stack directly to Sarah. Sarah placed the authentic documents squarely on top of the forged power of attorney. "This is the recorded establishment portfolio for the HW Capital Blind Trust," Sarah announced. This corporate entity was legally formed 6 months ago. The individual known as Harper Wilson transferred sole and exclusive ownership of the property located at that specific address into this trust. She is the authorized trustee. You are not listed anywhere in this chain of title. My father stared at the raised state seals. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. The stainless steel chronograph watch on his wrist caught the overhead light, mocking the financial ruin he was currently experiencing. "The document you submitted to this agency is a fabrication." Sarah continued, her voice slicing through his rising panic. "You presented an obsolete warranty deed. You provided a falsified power of attorney bearing a fraudulent notary stamp. You forged a signature to initiate a real estate transaction you have zero legal right to conduct." My mother let out a high-pitched gasp. She pressed both hands over her mouth, staring at the spilled coffee soaking into the carpet. She recognized the precise moment her carefully constructed illusion collapsed. There was no misunderstanding to hide behind. There was no plausible deniability. They were sitting in a corporate office staring at their own forged signatures on federally regulated disclosures. Sarah leaned forward and rested her hands on the table. She directed her next question at my parents with surgical precision. "The title company requires a formal explanation," Sarah stated. "If you are not the legal owners of this parcel, and you do not represent the corporate trust, where exactly did you get the keys to access the interior of the property?" The young buyers reacted to that specific question. The husband gasped sharply and pushed his chair away from the table as if the furniture had suddenly caught fire. He reached out and grabbed his wife's hand, pulling her closer to him. The young wife stared at my parents with an expression of profound horror. They finally understood the gravity of the situation. The nice older couple offering them a beautiful cedar porch had actually broken into a house they did not own to perpetrate a scam. The buyers realized they were inches away from handing their life savings over to criminals. "Did you break into her house?" the young husband asked, his voice shaking with a volatile mixture of fear and rage. "Did you try to sell us a stolen home?" My father opened his mouth to formulate a response, but his notorious charm had evaporated. He looked at the buyers. He looked at the escrow officer. He looked at the heavy red void stamp sitting on a nearby desk. Every exit was sealed. Every excuse was neutralized. The objective weight of the legal system was pressing down on his shoulders, and he possessed zero leverage to lift it. I stood beside the table and maintained my silence. I did not raise my voice to hurl insults. I did not shed a single tear of betrayal. I merely observed them. For 33 years, my parents demanded my compliance to fuel their own comfort. They extracted my earnings to subsidize the failures of their favorite son. They expected me to shrink myself so my brother could stand tall. They assumed I would always absorb the cost of their reckless entitlement. Today they learned the cost of underestimating a financial auditor. They walked into a snare built of their own greed. They signed the paper. They sealed their fate. The silence in the room stretching so tight it threatened to snap. The climax had arrived and my parents were suffocating under the undeniable truth of their own actions. The heavy silence in the conference room was profound and suffocating. My father stood at the edge of the mahogany table. His tall frame suddenly appeared hollow and unmoored. For his entire adult life, he had relied on a very specific defense mechanism whenever he was cornered by the consequences of his own actions. If he missed a mortgage payment, he charmed the bank teller until the late fees were waived. If he ruined a family holiday with his temper, he convinced everyone they were simply remembering the event wrong. He altered reality through sheer volume and relentless unearned confidence. He tried to deploy that exact same tactic right now. He forced a wide smile onto his face and let out a loud laugh. The sound did not fill the room with warmth. It was a brittle, hollow noise, and his voice cracked on the final note. The crack was a tiny physical betrayal, exposing the sheer terror underneath his tailored suit. "This is just a silly family miscommunication," my father said, waving his hand toward me as if shooing away a minor administrative nuisance. "Harper, you really need to stop pulling these dramatic stunts. Tell them it is fine. We are family. We will sort out the trust paperwork later today over dinner. There is no need to upset these nice people." He looked at the young buyers, offering them a conspiratorial grin. "You know how kids are," he added, chuckling weakly. "They read one article about asset protection on the internet and suddenly they think they are corporate raiders. We just wanted to save some time on the logistics while she was out of town. Everything is perfectly legal." I was attempting to shrink a federal crime into a quirky domestic dispute. He wanted the escrow officer and the young couple to view me as a difficult daughter, throwing a temper tantrum, rather than the victim of a six-figure theft. He expected me to nod my head, apologize for the confusion, and quietly sign the property over to him to avoid public embarrassment. That was his playbook. I had watched him use it 100 times to protect Liam from the real world. When my father realized I was not going to speak, my mother initiated her own rehearsed routine. Diane reached into her designer purse and withdrew a folded tissue. She dabbed at the corners of her eyes. Her breathing grew shallow and erratic. She summoned a stream of tears with the practiced ease of a seasoned stage actor performing a tragic monologue. Throughout my childhood, my mother's tears were the ultimate currency. When Liam failed high school chemistry, she sat in the principal's office and wept until the teacher agreed to change the grade. When Liam damaged a neighbor's fence with his car, she cried on the front porch until the neighbor agreed not to file an insurance claim. She believed her maternal weeping was a universal solvent capable of dissolving any rule or regulation. She leaned across the mahogany table and reached out to the young wife. "Please, you have to understand," Diane pleaded, her voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. "My daughter is just being dramatic. She works too hard and the stress makes her act out like this. We were only trying to help her manage her estate so she would not have to worry. We just wanted to help our son secure his future. We are good people. Please do not let her ruin this beautiful moment for you." The young wife recoiled. She pulled her hand away from my mother as if she had been offered a venomous snake. The corporate conference room is a sterile environment. It does not respond to maternal tears. It responds to ledgers, contracts, and verified chain of title. The buyers were not looking at a stressed mother trying to help her family. They were looking at a woman who had just tried to steal their life savings using a forged signature. Marcus Sterling stepped forward. He moved with a calm, deliberate grace, placing his hands flat on the edge of the table. He did not raise his voice. He did not need volume to command the space. He merely presented the facts with the lethal precision of a seasoned litigator dismantling a hostile witness. "There is no miscommunication taking place in this room," Marcus stated. His voice cut through my mother's performative sobbing like a scalpel. "You broke into a private fireproof safe. You stole an outdated warranty deed. You hired a fraudulent notary to stamp a falsified power of attorney. You sat at this table and swore an oath under the penalty of perjury that you owned an asset that legally belongs to a corporate trust. You then provided routing instructions to transfer hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars across state lines." Marcus paused, letting the severe weight of his words settle over my parents. The silence in the room was deafening. "That is not a family disagreement," Marcus continued, leaning closer to my father. "That is state forgery. That is perjury. That is federal wire fraud. You attempted to steal an astronomical sum of money from a protected legal entity. The documentation is signed, and the physical evidence is secured right here in this folder. You cannot smile your way out of a felony indictment. My father opened his mouth, but the words died in his throat. The smile vanished from his face entirely. He looked at the heavy red void stamp sitting on the nearby administrative desk. He looked at the signed settlement statement resting in Sarah's manila folder. He finally grasped the cold reality of his situation. He could not charm a corporate trust. He could not gaslight a recorded deed. The emotional manipulation that had governed our family dynamic for 3 decades was utterly useless against the objective machinery of the legal system. The young husband stood up from his chair. His face was pale, but his posture was rigid with anger. He realized he had been sitting in a room with criminals. He realized the beautiful house with the cedar porch and the mature oak trees was a mirage dangled in front of him by 2 con artists. He realized how close he came to losing everything. "Cancel our side of the transaction immediately," the young husband said, looking directly at Sarah. "I want our earnest money refunded to our account by the end of the business hour. We are withdrawing our offer right now." Sarah nodded her head in swift professional agreement. "I will initiate the wire reversal immediately," she confirmed, typing a sequence into her laptop. "Your funds are safe and they will be returned in full before noon." The young husband turned his attention back to my father. Richard shrank back in his leather chair. The patriarchal authority he had projected 20 minutes earlier was entirely gone. He looked small and incredibly fragile in his expensive suit. "You lied to us," the young husband said, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "You sat there and told us stories about your son while you tried to steal our down payment. My wife and I spent 3 grueling years saving that money. We skipped meals, we drove broken cars, we planned to paint a nursery in that house, and you were just going to take our cash and hand us a fake deed so your son could go on a yacht." My father held up his hands in a weak defensive gesture. "We did not want to hurt you," Richard stammered, staring at the table. "We were going to make it right later. We just needed the cash for my son to network. He is going to be very successful." "You are going to hear from our attorney," the young husband interrupted, refusing to listen to another word of the delusion. "We are going to sue you for fraud. We are going to sue you for misrepresentation and damages. You dragged us into a federal crime and you are going to pay for it." The young wife stood up and grabbed her purse. She did not shed a single tear. She glared at my mother with a look of profound revulsion. Diane sat frozen, clutching her damp tissue, unable to comprehend why her weeping had failed to secure sympathy. The young couple turned and walked briskly out of the conference room, leaving the heavy door wide open behind them. Their departure sucked the remaining oxygen out of the space. The transaction was officially dead, the buyers were gone and they were taking their money with them. The $80,000 payout my father had promised Liam was gone. The funds to clear their second mortgage were gone. My parents were left sitting at a mahogany table, surrounded by the undeniable proof of their own criminality. They were trapped in a glass room with an escrow officer who despised them, a ruthless attorney who had cornered them, and a daughter they could no longer control. The gaslighting had failed. The tears had failed. The stage was set for the final legal hammer to fall, and they had nowhere left to run. The heavy wooden door swung shut behind the departing young couple, severing their connection to the fraudulent transaction. Their rapid footsteps faded down the carpeted hallway of the title agency, leaving a profound vacuum in their wake. The atmosphere inside the glass-walled enclosure shifted from tense negotiation to the grim reality of a closed trap. Marcus Sterling walked calmly toward the entrance. He reached out and grasped the brass lever. He pushed the deadbolt into place. A sharp metallic click echoed through the quiet space. It was the undeniable sound of containment. My parents were no longer seated in a business meeting. They were isolated inside a legal quarantine. My father stared at the locked door. His broad shoulders slumped, losing the artificial posture of wealth he had projected all morning. The stainless steel watch on his wrist suddenly looked absurdly heavy, a luxurious anchor dragging him toward the bottom of a financial ocean. Marcus turned around and walked back to the mahogany table. He did not sit down. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick bound stack of premium legal paper. He dropped the heavy document directly onto the center of the table. The sudden impact made my mother flinch in her chair. "This document is a drafted civil complaint," Marcus stated, his voice vibrating with lethal professional authority. "We are filing it in the Travis County Civil Court system before the close of business today. It names both of you as primary defendants in a comprehensive lawsuit regarding tortious interference, conversion of personal property, and fraudulent misrepresentation." Richard stared at the thick stack of paper as if it were an explosive device. "We do not have it," Richard whispered, his voice cracking again. "We are retired. We live on fixed pensions. You cannot squeeze water from a stone. You should have considered your limited liquidity before you attempted to steal a premium real estate parcel," Marcus replied. "We are holding you personally liable for every single cent of collateral damage generated by your scheme. You will reimburse the young buyers for their appraisal fees, inspection costs, and the emotional distress of your deception. You will pay the entire hotel bill for my client's temporary lodging. You will cover the premium contractor fees required to retrieve her personal belongings from the Burnett Road storage unit." Marcus tapped a long finger against the cover of the lawsuit. "Furthermore, you are responsible for my premier litigation retainer. By the time this civil suit concludes, the financial judgments levied against you will force the immediate liquidation of your own home in Round Rock. You tried to clear your secondary mortgage by stealing your daughter's equity. Instead, you are going to lose your residence entirely to satisfy these court-ordered penalties." My mother let out a strangled gasp. She looked down at the dark coffee stains soaking into her beige leather shoes. The reality of losing her comfortable suburban house was piercing through her delusion. But the civil lawsuit was only the initial layer of the impending devastation. The true hammer had not yet fallen. Sarah, the senior escrow officer, leaned forward. She adjusted the manila folder containing their forged signatures. Her expression remained devoid of any customer service warmth. "The financial damages are a private civil matter," Sarah explained, her tone brisk and unforgiving. "However, the actions you took inside my office carry a separate mandatory protocol. The Texas Department of Insurance heavily regulates the title industry. I am legally obligated by state statutes to report any documented instance of title fraud." She tapped the signed affidavit of title. "You presented a falsified power of attorney. You executed a sworn oath under penalty of perjury. You submitted fraudulent banking instructions to initiate an interstate wire transfer. If I conceal these actions, I forfeit my professional license and face prosecution myself. I am transmitting this entire file to the Travis County District Attorney Fraud Division immediately." Marcus crossed his arms over his tailored suit jacket. "The district attorney takes a very aggressive stance against real estate fraud," he added. "The forgery of a financial instrument and the attempted wire fraud elevate this crime well beyond a standard misdemeanor. Based on the astronomical dollar amount you tried to misappropriate, you are looking at second-degree felony charges." The word felony hung in the chilled air of the conference room. It is a heavy word. It carries the distinct scent of concrete cells and metal bars. "The statutory guidelines for a second-degree felony in this state carry a mandatory minimum sentence," Marcus continued relentlessly. "You are facing significant time in a state penitentiary." Diane collapsed forward into her chair. Her elbows struck the mahogany table, and she buried her face in her trembling hands. The performative weeping she had weaponized for decades vanished. It was replaced by a raw, guttural sobbing. Her chest heaved with genuine hyperventilation. She was a retired public school teacher who spent her weekends baking for church potlucks. She had orchestrated this theft, assuming the worst possible outcome was a stern lecture from her daughter. Now she was staring directly at the prospect of wearing a prison uniform. The sheer gravity of her own hubris was crushing her lungs. Richard turned away from the attorney and looked at me. The arrogant patriarch was entirely gone. The man sitting in the leather chair was a frail, terrified shadow. His face was pale and slick with a cold, nervous sweat. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape hatch that did not exist. "Harper, please," my father begged. His voice was a thin, desperate whisper. "You cannot do this to us. We are your parents. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You cannot send your own mother to prison over a simple mistake. Tell them to drop the lawsuit. Tell them not to call the district attorney. Please, Harper. Howe was deploying his final desperate tactic. He was invoking the biological bond. He expected the title of father to serve as an impenetrable shield against accountability. He wanted me to prioritize his freedom over my own financial survival. I looked at the man who had authorized the destruction of my sanctuary. I looked at the woman sobbing into her hands, who had packed my framed college degrees into cardboard boxes without a single ounce of hesitation. I felt the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. There was no rage left inside my chest. There was no sorrow. There was only the cold, clear, objective truth. You chose to break into my private safe, I said, my voice echoing cleanly against the glass walls. You chose to lie to a woman at your church to secure a fake notary stamp. You chose to hire laborers to drag my antique furniture out of my living room. You orchestrated a complex federal crime while smiling through text messages and asking me about the weather in Chicago. I took a step closer to the edge of the table. Richard shrank backward, pressing his spine against the leather chair. You did all of that, so Liam could drink $400 bottles of vintage champagne on a yacht. I continued. You decided my years of grueling corporate labor were merely a slush fund for his delusions. You weighed my security against his unearned luxury and you chose him. You always choose him. But we are a family. Richard pleaded, tears finally spilling over his lower eyelids. You aren't my parents today, I stated, my tone utterly devoid of sympathy. Today, you are simply two people who tried to steal my house, and I protect what is mine. I did not wait for his response. I did not need to hear another desperate rationalization or empty apology. The investigation was complete. The audit was finalized. The fraudulent ledger had been corrected. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. Marcus unlatched the brass deadbolt and pulled the heavy wooden door open for me. I stepped out of the conference room and into the bright hallway of the title agency. I left them sitting at the mahogany table, trapped in the physical wreckage of their own greed. They were locked in a room with a ruthless litigator and a furious escrow officer who were about to dismantle the rest of their lives. As I walked toward the elevator bay, my cell phone vibrated inside my blazer pocket. I pulled the device out and looked at the illuminated screen. The trap in Austin had successfully snapped shut, cutting off the promised funds. The ripple effect was already traveling across the digital banking network, reaching all the way to a luxury resort in Cabo San Lucas. Liam was about to discover what happens when you fund a millionaire lifestyle using a stolen check that bounces. I stepped into the elevator at the title agency and pressed the glowing button for the subterranean parking garage. The stainless steel doors slid shut, severing my physical proximity to the conference room. My cell phone vibrated inside my blazer pocket, but I ignored the incoming notification. I needed to execute the next sequence of my financial severance before I entertained any frantic communications from my family. The fraudulent real estate transaction was officially neutralized. My parents were trapped in a legal nightmare of their own design. But the broader financial ecosystem they had exploited for years still required immediate dismantling. I drove the rented silver sedan back to my temporary room at the Marriott Hotel. The afternoon sun baked the Texas asphalt, but the interior of my vehicle remained cool and quiet. When I arrived at my room, I sat at the small ergonomic desk and opened my secure banking portfolio on my laptop. For the past 4 years, I had maintained a specific high-limit credit account. I originally authorized secondary cards for my mother and father. We established a strict verbal agreement, designating those specific cards exclusively for severe medical emergencies or urgent vehicle repairs. Liam also possessed a plastic card linked to that exact same account. My parents had quietly passed it to him under the guise of providing a safety net for his volatile entrepreneurial lifestyle. I had tolerated the arrangement for years, absorbing occasional minor charges to maintain household peace. That tolerance ended today. I dialed the toll-free number for the bank fraud department. A representative named David answered the line. I provided my security pins and verified my identity through a 2-step authentication process. I instructed David to immediately revoke all secondary user authorizations linked to my primary account. I directed his attention to a series of recent international pending charges originating from a five-star hospitality resort in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. I formally reported those specific expenditures as unauthorized non-emergency transactions. David typed rapidly on his keyboard. He confirmed the secondary cards were permanently deactivated and the international charges were flagged for dispute. The financial umbilical cord was officially severed. My family could no longer siphon my corporate earnings to fund their daily existence or their lavish delusions. The consequences of this severance cascaded outward with brutal efficiency over the next 48 hours. The weekend arrived, bringing a tidal wave of accountability. Marcus Sterling filed our comprehensive civil complaint on Friday afternoon, triggering a legal process that would eventually force the liquidation of my parents' suburban home. Sarah transmitted her fraud report to the Travis County District Attorney. My mother and father were trapped inside their Round Rock residence, navigating a severe legal disaster. They were consulting defense attorneys and calculating their impending ruin. They could not wire any rescue funds to Mexico because their own checking accounts were empty and the stolen real estate payout never materialized. This systemic collapse left my 36-year-old brother sitting on the Baja California peninsula without a financial parachute. Liam had spent the previous 4 days acting like a wealthy tech investor. He ordered premium room service items. He drank vintage champagne on stone balconies overlooking the ocean. He treated the resort staff like personal servants. He operated on the strict, arrogant assumption that a six-figure house sale would cover his exorbitant tab when he checked out on Sunday morning. He believed the $80,000 wire transfer would clear in time for him to board his international flight to Europe and join his exclusive yacht syndicate. He was living entirely on a bridge loan of sheer hubris. Sunday afternoon. My phone screen lit up. I was sitting in the hotel lobby drinking a cup of warm green tea. The notification displayed a new text message from Liam. It was an image file. I opened the attachment and studied the picture. It was a blurry photograph taken at the resort concierge desk. The image showed a black point-of-sale terminal resting on a polished marble counter. The digital screen displayed a bright red error message. Transaction declined. Contact issuing bank. Below the photographic evidence was a frantic block of text lacking his usual unearned confidence. Harper, my card is not working. The front desk is holding my passport. Call the bank right now and authorize the payment. I have a flight to catch. I set my phone on the table and took a slow sip of my tea. I did not type a reply. I did not offer an explanation. I let the silence stretch across the international border. 5 minutes later, my phone rang loudly. The caller identification displayed a Mexican country code. Liam was calling directly from the hotel lobby. I accepted the connection and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say a word. Harper, what did you do to the account? Liam yelled into the receiver. His voice was shrill and vibrating with naked terror. The hotel manager is standing right next to me with 2 security guards. My final bill is $8,000. The card keeps declining every time they swipe it. Dad is not picking up his phone. You need to wire funds to this resort immediately, or they are going to call the local police. I listened to his panicked breathing echoing through the speaker. He still believed he held supreme authority over my wallet. He still assumed my sole purpose in life was to fix his mistakes and fund his comfort. He had no idea his entire artificial world had collapsed on Friday morning. He did not know his parents were facing felony indictments and could not save him. I canceled your unauthorized card, Liam, I said, keeping my tone flat and conversational. I also canceled the secondary cards held by Richard and Diane. I revoked your access to my credit line permanently. You cannot do that, he screamed. His panic escalated into a frantic, desperate pitch. I am in a foreign country, Harper. I am supposed to fly to the Mediterranean today for the incubator syndicate. If I do not settle this hotel bill, the Mexican authorities are going to arrest me for defrauding a hospitality business. They are going to throw me in a local jail cell. You have to fix this right now. I rested my ceramic teacup on the saucer. I thought about the $12,000 I had paid to clear his previous collection agency debts. I thought about the $400 bottle of champagne he sprayed over the balcony while mocking my work ethic. I thought about my framed college degrees sitting in a hot storage unit on Burnett Road because my parents decided my achievements were merely clutter standing in the way of his vacation. "I cannot help you, Liam," I replied, my voice devoid of any familial warmth. "But you have two very supportive parents in Texas who believe in your visionary potential. Ask Dad to sell his house to pay for your happiness." I pressed the red button on my screen to terminate the call. I did not listen to his inevitable screaming response. I opened his contact profile and selected the block option. I performed the exact same digital action for my father and my mother. I effectively erased their ability to reach me through any communication medium. The social currency of my family was entirely wiped out. The artificial ecosystem they had built using my dedicated labor was permanently dismantled. The golden child was stranded thousands of miles away from home, facing local law enforcement for a luxury bill he could never afford. His European yacht charter was nothing but a vaporized fantasy. His enabling parents could not send him a single dime because they were fighting to stay out of a state penitentiary. They were finally experiencing the unshielded reality of their own selfish choices. The delusion was over. Exactly 7 days after the aborted transaction at the title agency, I stood on my custom cedar porch in the early morning Austin heat. The humid air carried the faint scent of cut grass from a neighboring yard. A professional locksmith knelt in front of my heavy oak door. He was a quiet, methodical worker surrounded by tiny brass shavings shining on the welcome mat. He removed the standard residential cylinder my parents had compromised. In its place, he installed a commercial-grade high-security deadbolt. He finished tightening the reinforced steel strike plate and stood up, wiping his hands on a blue cloth. He handed me a pair of heavy silver keys. He explained that the new hardware utilized restricted keyways, preventing anyone from duplicating them at a hardware store without my explicit authorization. I thanked him, paid his invoice, and slipped the keys into my pocket. I pushed the door closed. The new deadbolt engaged with a heavy, resounding metallic click. That crisp sound echoed through my empty foyer. It was not just the sound of a locking mechanism securing a wooden frame. It was the physical manifestation of a permanent boundary. The perimeter of my life was finally sealed. My sanctuary was secure, but the interior remained severely disrupted. I needed to retrieve my personal history from the Burnett Road storage unit. I did not rent a cheap box truck or ask friends for favors. I hired a premium white glove moving company. I directed a team of 4 professionals to the metal storage locker my parents had rented. The Texas sun beat down on the corrugated roof, making the inside of the unit feel like a furnace. I watched the movers carefully extract the cheap cardboard boxes my mother had packed. They loaded my vintage brass mantel clock, my framed college degrees, and my heavy oak dining chairs into their climate-controlled transit vehicle. They drove the inventory back to my property and meticulously restored every single item to its rightful place. They unpacked my corporate filing cabinets and reassembled my reading chair in its original corner. They carried the generic fake hydrangeas the staging broker had purchased and threw them into the outdoor trash bin. When the moving team finished their work, I sat at my glass desk and reviewed their premium invoice. The total exceeded $2,000. I saved the digital receipt and forwarded it directly to Marcus Sterling. Marcus attached the expenditure to our pending civil lawsuit, adding it to the growing column of financial damages my parents were legally obligated to repay. Marcus provided a brief status update regarding the pending litigation during our afternoon phone call. The legal machinery we activated was grinding forward with relentless efficiency. The Travis County District Attorney received the fraud report from Sarah, the escrow officer. The prosecutors reviewed the forged power of attorney, the falsified notary stamp, and the executed closing disclosures. They initiated a formal grand jury investigation. My father and mother were currently spending their retirement savings retaining criminal defense counsel to negotiate their impending felony indictments. Furthermore, Marcus successfully filed a lis pendens against my parents' suburban residence in Round Rock. This legal maneuver placed a formal cloud on their title, preventing them from selling or refinancing their own house to escape their debts. We effectively froze their primary asset. They were trapped inside the very walls they were destined to lose. Marcus also shared a brief detail regarding the situation in Mexico. My brother did not receive a magical rescue. When his credit card declined at the luxury resort, the hospitality management confiscated his passport and summoned the local authorities. Liam spent 3 days detained in a municipal holding facility. He was only released after a consular official facilitated a predatory promissory note converting his $8,000 hotel tab into an international default judgment. He was deported back to Texas, carrying nothing but a designer suitcase and a crippling debt he could not pay. His Mediterranean yacht networking incubator remained exactly what it always was, a vaporized delusion. I disconnected the call with Marcus and opened my laptop. Even though I blocked my family from calling or texting my primary mobile device, they found a secondary channel. My mother discovered she could bypass the block by calling my digital office line and leaving direct voicemails on the corporate server. I accessed the digital inbox. There were 14 unread audio files sitting in the queue. I clicked the play button on the most recent message. My mother's voice filled my quiet home office. The manufactured weeping she deployed in the title company conference room was gone. Her tone sounded thin, exhausted, and desperate. She spoke in fractured sentences. She told me the defense attorneys were demanding exorbitant retainers. She said my father was experiencing high blood pressure and could not sleep. She begged me to call the district attorney and drop the civil lawsuit. Then she delivered the exact sentence I knew she would eventually use. She said family should always stick together during hard times. I listened to her invoke that familiar phrase and felt a profound sense of clarity. For 3 decades, she utilized that specific concept as a weapon. Sticking together always meant Harper absorbs the damage so Liam can thrive. Sticking together meant sacrificing my financial security to fund their comfort. Loyalty was a one-way street terminating directly at my bank account. I did not listen to the remaining 13 voicemails. I highlighted the entire queue of audio files and clicked the delete icon. The server purged the messages instantly. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. You cannot negotiate with entitlement. You cannot reason with people who view your achievements merely as dormant resources waiting to be harvested. I closed my laptop and walked out of my office. I wandered through my restored house feeling the solid hardwood floor beneath my feet. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long golden shadows across the living room. The brass mantel clock ticked with a steady, reassuring rhythm. My reading chair sat in its proper corner, inviting me to rest. The environment was pristine. The air felt clean and breathable. The lingering tension I had carried in my shoulders for years was entirely gone. People often confuse setting boundaries with seeking revenge. They view drastic legal action as a vindictive punishment. But my actions were never rooted in malice. I did not orchestrate this outcome to inflict pain upon the people who raised me. I simply stepped out of the way and allowed the natural consequences of their own choices to catch them. They forged the documents. They swore the false oaths. They broke into the safe. I merely presented the mirror and let the legal system enforce the reflection. Peace is not found in seeking petty retaliation. Peace is found in building an uncompromising perimeter around your life and refusing to apologize for protecting it. True family loyalty should never require you to set yourself on fire simply to keep someone else warm. Love does not require collateral. Respect is not built on a foundation of financial extraction. My name is Harper Wilson. I am a 33-year-old financial auditor living in Austin, Texas. This cedar porch belongs to me. These walls belong to me. The quiet evening settling over this neighborhood belongs to me. I built this sanctuary with my own hands, and I will never let anyone take it away. That is the end of my story. Now I have a question for all of you watching. If your parents sold your hard-earned sanctuary to fund someone else's luxury vacation, would you have stopped them early? Or would you have let them walk directly into the trap at the closing table? Drop your answer in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, or if you have ever had to enforce a severe boundary with your own relatives, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. It helps this channel grow and ensures you never miss the next upload. Thank you for spending your time with Calm Senior Stories. I will see you in the next video. We grow up believing that family constitutes the ultimate safety net. In the American ethos, we are taught to work grueling hours, forge our own paths, and build a life of rugged independence. Yet there is an unspoken contradiction woven into that cultural dream. The quiet expectation that once you finally construct your sanctuary, you must leave the front door unlocked for the very blood relatives who refuse to build their own. Harper's journey holds a mirror up to a quiet epidemic. It is the narrative of the reliable workhorse, the one who quietly funds the failures of the favored sibling while swallowing the bitter pill of familial obligation. Society often conditions us to believe that keeping the peace requires setting ourselves on fire just to keep our relatives warm. The defining lesson here is that drawing a hard line is not an act of vengeance. Boundaries are the architecture of survival. When you spend years shrinking your own potential so someone else can stand tall, you train them to view your sacrifices as their rightful inheritance. Stepping out of the way and letting the cold objective consequences catch them isn't cruel. It is the purest form of self-respect. You cannot negotiate with boundless entitlement. Sometimes the only viable option is to install a high-security deadbolt and listen to the crisp, metallic click of your own reclaimed peace. If you find yourself standing at a similar crossroads holding a heavy ring of keys and wondering if it is time to change the locks on your own life, you are not alone. These silent battles happen in suburban living rooms and corporate offices every single day. We share these journeys to remind you that your worth is not measured by the financial comfort you provide to others. Follow the channel Calm Senior Stories, where we continue to explore the complex, often painful realities of family dynamics and join a community that understands the true cost of independence. Look at your own front door tonight. Run your fingers over the brass lock. There is a profound echoing quiet that settles over a house when you finally stop answering calls from people who only view you as a resource. The sudden stillness might feel strange at first. It might even carry a faint shadow of grief. But as the evening light fades across your floorboards, you have to ask yourself a difficult question. Is that silence an empty void? Or is it simply the sound of finally having room to breathe?